All right, welcome to Chapter 8. So today we're going to start on the basics of getting information in and out of your script. So we've done a lot of stuff to analyze data within scripts using different objects, but a lot of times you also want to be able to analyze maybe specific files, or you want to change exactly how a script writes, how a script runs. And so we're going to cover some of the basics of this, and this first lecture today is basically how we get information to our script. We change information to our script using arguments. So we've seen arguments before, so every time we run a command, so for example when we do ls, we run a command, and if we wanted to make a directory on the command line, we can do something like this. So we can say make directory Python class, and so this command runs, but it needs to take in this argument, and this customizes how exactly it runs, so that instead of just creating a generic directory, we can now give it a specific name. And then we've also seen this, for example, with remove. So if we wanted to remove this directory, we might do something like this, and so we specify how this command runs so it deletes something specific. And if we run this, we're going to get an error, and that's because Python class is a directory. And so to get this to work, we also have to add a flag as well, and that is the -r, so recursive. And so anytime you want to delete a directory, you have to use this flag in order to get it to do that. And so we've encountered this before, if you want to move something, so move Python class to Python class 2, we supply two different arguments to this command move, and now that works. So we can make Python scripts that do the exact same thing. And so instead of just running something like this, Python myscript.py, where we specify the name, we also might want to run it with a different number of arguments. So this argument is called argument 1, file 2, 3, and then we have a -f flag. And so if we want to do that, we have to have our script able to take in this information so the script knows how exactly the user ran it. And so how do we do this? So the most basic way that you can do that is that you use a module called sys. And so let's create this. So just in my home directory, I will create a script that is called myscript.py. And so now I import sys. And I am going to add this line. And so I can now run the script. So we see that the script now exists in our home directory, and so I run it like normal. So let's say I run it like this. Now you see an object was printed out. So this sys.argv prints a list. So again, always notice that the open and close brackets, I have a list object on my hands, and I have one element of the list, and the element is the name of the script. Let's say I run it again, and I add a bunch of other things. And you'll notice every single thing that I print, every single thing that I type after the name of the script is now available within this argv list. So there's this object called sysargv, and each element is one of the arguments that I pass to it. So we have an argument 23, we have an argument new file, and we have an argument -f. So what it does is it separates based upon white space. So if I used a tab, if I used 5 different spaces here in between, it doesn't include the spaces as different elements. And you'll also notice that the numbers are all converted to strings. So this 23 is not a number. This 23 is actually a string. So if I wanted to create a script that was called protein or DNA analyzer.py, and then I entered the name of the piece of DNA that I wanted to analyze like so, I could run it something like this. So how would I do this? So let's create a new script, and all right, so now you'll notice I have access to this nucleotide sequence. And so let's say I wanted to analyze this and print out the number of A's, C's, G's, and T's. So I could do that by accessing the element. So the 0 element is the name of the script, and then the first element is the first argument that I send. And I can, for example, count the number of A's within it. C's, G's, and T's. Boom. Now I got those numbers. If I want to make it a little bit prettier, then I can, modify it like so. So in this way, we now have a script that takes an input at the command line and analyzes it. And so we could also, send it the name of a file, for example, that has like a DNA sequence or anything else. So this is the basics of one way of how to do it, but you should actually never get input into your program using this sys.argv. This is just kind of a basic example to see how it's done. And I also include this because if anyone comes from like C or C++, you're probably very familiar with argv as a way to get input into your script. But Python, if you want to use Python, what you really want to use is you want to use the Arg Parse module. So this Arg Parse module is a built-in module that has been created in order to not only take in arguments from the user, but also do all sorts of error checking. So when you create a script, you want to specify this script takes in a single file. And so if the user uses it incorrectly, you want to have some sort of error checking. So what do I mean by that? So like, let's see. So, when you use something incorrectly, so when I run so sometimes you can take in multiple arguments, but sometimes if you use the incorrect number of arguments, you want it to have an error. So if you want to use the remove command, you want to make sure that they also include the name of a file to remove. Similarly, if I want to make a directory, I have to include the name of a directory as well. And so if they also send, for example, a legal option, then you also want to print some sort of help and error correcting. So you can certainly do that using sysargv. You could specify sys. You could write your own custom error checking, but in general, that's not the way you want to do things in Python. You want to take advantage of things that are already built, and so this is where we want to be using the Arg Parse module. So again, like all modules, you simply have to import the Arg Parse module. And so we'll see kind of enter the interpreter, import Arg Parse, and then we'll see what comes along with it. And so you see that there are some magic methods that are included. There are some private functions that start with the underscore. And then you see a bunch of things that actually start with capital letters. And so one of the most useful ones of these is the argument parser. And so we are going to, pretty much the way you always start using Arg Parse, is that you create an argument parser object. And so if we just do this in the interpreter, unfortunately the quotes, the double quotes have to be replaced. We see we've created this brand new object. So parser is a type of an object of the argument parser class. So this is a custom class that we haven't seen before. And it also has all sorts of functions and methods associated with it. So a few things about this. So argument parser, this right here is not actually a method or a attribute. So this is something brand new. This is a constructor. So a constructor is something that creates a custom object of the argument parser class. So it's almost identical to running something like this. So if you run int6 or if you run string ABC, what you're doing is you're telling it to create an object of an integer class. You're creating a string object. And so in Python, you can always recognize things that are there to create new objects like constructors because they are capitalized. So sorry, dir arg parse. So all of these things right here are creating new objects, just like the argument parser. Okay, so within this parser, there are going to be two main methods that you use. So the first one is add argument, and then the second one is parse args. And then there's some others you might use as well. So you create a parser object, and then the next thing that you have to do is parse the args. And so what this does is it says take what is in, so what this function does is it takes what is in system sys.argv, and then it analyzes it, it does error checking, etc. So how do we do this? So let's see we have this script, and now what happens if we run this script? So Python 3 DNA analyzer, and unfortunately this again has to be fixed. All right, so far it's ran, but nothing has happened. But if we now run -h, so -h is a common flag that you use if you want to get help for something, you see now that we actually have some built-in help functions. So this program does something cool. So that was this description. So whatever we put in this description, this prints out. So like if you're creating the script that someone else is going to use, you can give information to that person on how this script is going to work. And then it shows all of the optional arguments that can be used but are not necessary. So along with the ride, just by creating this parser object, there's this -h argument, and that prints out this kind of useful information here. So now let's start adding arguments. So if you wanted to add a argument, let's say loop. So we take this method add argument, and so the first thing, so you notice that there's 1, 2, 3 different arguments that we sent to this method. The first one is the name of the argument that is necessary, and then we can also specify the type. So this is again very useful. So if a user needs to send in an integer, we can specify that by saying we need an integer class type object, and then we can also give some sort of help that describes this particular argument. So this is the number of times you want to run a loop. All right, so let's run this again. So again, we're going to run this. And so now we get this error. So as soon as we try to run this, there's an error. And that's because this loops object is an essential argument of the program. And so in order to use it, you have to include this right here. And now we also notice when we run the -h, we have this what's called positional arguments. So positional arguments have to be in the proper order. And so you have to supply this loops the number of times you want a loop to run. So if we run it like this, let's say I want to run this 6 times. Okay, lo and behold, now it works. Let's say I try to give it some sort of, data. So you'll also find that because I did not send it an integer, Arg Parse reports an error, and so it says invalid integer value data. And so what this means is that this argument loops requires an integer value in order to run. Again, we get this nice error checking without having to do any work. So all we did is like write this little line, and now we're getting all of this additional error checking as well. So let's say we want to do something with this argument. And so you cannot, so let's run a loop for I in range. And so the way you get to this variable right here, this variable here is stored as part of this args object. So when you parse args, you have to give it a name. So this returns an information, it's called a namespace, that contains all of the argument information that was passed to it. And so then you just use the dot operator, dot loops, in order to access it. So let's try this first. Let's just print, for example, the user wants this script to run for X times. All right, so I'm just going to basically print out the value. So the user wants this script to print out for 6 times. If I gave it the number 12, 12 times, 1 time, -1, -1 time. So now we can also do something like this. This is the all right, and now let's run it. So 5, and I have a syntax error. This is the 0 time, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. So now we can use this information to customize how exactly we are running the program. If we wanted to add an additional positional argument, actually one of the things also I want to show you really quick. Let's say I put this print statement right here, and I tried to run it. So one thing to remember is that you don't have access to this data, to what the user gives you, until you actually run this parse arguments function. And so if you run this before, you're going to get this error, this name error, name args is not defined, because you actually have to parse the arguments in order to get access to that information. Let's see. other thing that you can do right here, you can also, for example, specify actually we'll get to that in a second. Choices can also be useful. So let's see what happens if we run this with a -1. I forgot to save it. The user wants the script to run -1 times. So maybe you have a, it doesn't really make sense to run this 0 times or -1 time, or maybe you want to have a maximum value that you want the user to be able to run. And so if you want to have some sort of error checking, you can add this choices flag right here. And so this is just the range of choices that that are allowed. So sorry, what is this? And I clearly made a small mistake. Yes, so this is where an example where the error reporting is actually a bit of a mess. Okay, so let's make this range a little bit smaller. So let's say we only wanted to run it that time. So so if I want to run it 1 time, you know, 8 times, but then I give it an improper value, then I get an error, and then this lists the number, the choices that I have. So -1 is not okay. I only can do between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can also add another positional argument. So let's say I wanted to have another argument that said, do I want to have extra info? And so the 2 choices are yes or no. So basically I'm storing a string, and then you can either put yes or no, otherwise there's going to be an error. And so if args.extraInfo equals yes, then print here is some extra info. And so, shoot. So now I get an error when I try to run it. The number is wrong, so now I try to do that, and now I get another one because now I have to use the second argument, extra info. And so, let's say I give it the wrong one. I have to choose from yes or no. So let's do yes. All right, so this is the 0 time we ran the loop. Here is some extra info. And then if I put no, that doesn't run. So this is just another way to kind of modify how your script is running. You can also have flags. So let's say you didn't want to, let's say, let's do it like this to start out. All right, so how do we make this into a flag? So Arg Parse automatically recognizes this by whenever you just start the argument name with a dash. And the way you typically want to do this is that you want to give each flag 2 different names. So you'll notice, when I run this optional argument here, so you can either use -h, so a single dash is followed by a single letter, or you can have a more verbose form of the flag where you use 2 dashes and then the full name of the flag, so -- help. So this is a very common way that things can be run. And so you specify the first name if you're trying to add a flag, and then a second name with the double dashes. Again, we have help, and again, we have type. So the default way that flags work is that they're optional. So typically these are just optional. So what happens if we run this? Okay, everything runs fine, but now you notice that if we run the help command, so we have 2 positional arguments, the number of times you want a loop to run, and then do you want to print extra information, yes or no. And now we have this optional argument that you can enter. So the value of the flag is, and then the way you access this variable is that ~name is how you can access that from Args. And so now if you run it, again, you always have to convert things to strings, otherwise you can get a concatenation error. And I lost a parentheses. All right. So the value of the flag is none. So because we did not provide the flag, then it's automatically stored as this none type. But if we did give it, you'll notice the value of the flag is file.text. And we also could have ran it like this. So the value of the flag is file.text. So let's say we wanted to only print this if we used the flag. So if args.file is not none. So notice that none is not a string. It's actually a built-in it's a built-in object. So if you do not provide the flag, this args.file is stored as this none type object. And now if we run it, I gotta save it. And because I made an if block, I need to indent it. And so it does not actually run and print it out, but if I give it a flag, then we're actually able to print this out. You can make this required if you want. So if you want this flag to be required, So right now it's optional. You can add this keyword required equals true when you add the argument. And so if we run it now like this, the following arguments are required, -f -- file. You can also add a flag that doesn't take an argument. So So for example, when you run remove, so make directory, new directory. So this is a positional argument that we gave it. And now when we remove it, we give it a flag, and we give it also a argument, a positional argument. And so this -r does not actually take any sort of argument with it. You know, we could have done it like this as well, where you put the -r afterwards. Oops, I guess the position does matter for this. But this, so sometimes you have flags that do not require any arguments, and so they just modify the way something runs. And so if you want to do something like this, instead of getting a type, you simply give it an action. Store true. And so let's see what this is equal to. And I misspelled this. All right. All right, so the user wants the script to run for 2 times. The value of the flag is file.text. And now you see that the interaction flag is equal to false. So this print right here printed this false right here. And then if we added it, now it is equal to true. So now we have this flag that can either be true or false, and you know, you can use that information to modify your program. All right, so that is the end of Arg Parse, and next we will get into outputting information to the console.